demand. Meanwhile, Indonesia's trade balance also recorded a surplus of $35 billion throughout 2021. This is the highest level in the last 14 years. Effective policy measures to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic have successfully protected the vulnerable group. Along with the positive economic growth, welfare indicators also showed improvement, among others reflected in our poverty rate, which returned to a single digit, and the decline of unemployment rate. In addition, a strong synergy and coordination among fiscal, monetary, and financial sector authorities have succeeded in safeguarding stability and accelerating economic recovery. Indonesia's economy is expected to sustain its recovery momentum in 2022. Infrastructure is an essential enabling factor to accelerate growth. While it's directly adding the aggregate demand, infrastructure facilitates greater economic activities, boosting production and consumption, enhancing productive capacity as one of our foremost priorities, focusing on most critical areas such as connectivity, logistics, energy, food, and digital. In short, infrastructure has an important role in facilitating economic transformation and boosting national economic recovery. Nonetheless, building good quality and adequate infrastructure needs enormous funding. Government budget alone cannot fully meet the funding needs. Thus, involvement from the private sector is necessary for infrastructure financing. The public-private partnership has been pivotal globally, along with the continuous efforts to promote other innovative financing schemes. Going forward, we hope that more private sector would participate in this partnership to accelerate infrastructure development in this country further. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, infrastructure is also the backbone of the global economy. However, the infrastructure landscape is rapidly changing as the unprecedented effects of the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic add pressure and complexity to our ability to deliver the infrastructure target of 2050. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the investment flow into infrastructure development. The shrinking fiscal space has forced the government to focus its limited resources on urgent pandemic-related needs. On the other hand, private investment in infrastructure projects has been held back due to delays or cancellations. While efforts to overcome the pandemic remain critical in this current juncture, the collective initiative to increase infrastructure investment is also critically important to address the scarring effect, to enhance long-term growth potential, as well as to support transition toward a greener economy, particularly in achieving carbon emission reduction targets. It is estimated that around $6.3 trillion of infrastructure investment each year is needed to meet 2030 development goals, and even increase to $6.9 trillion a year to achieve the Paris Agreement target. Infrastructure investment is required to be prioritized towards a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy. Sustainable infrastructure can significantly contribute to enhance the medium and long-term economic growth. However, we still have several challenges in implementing sustainable infrastructure, especially at the speed and scale to support COVID-19 recovery and achieve global climate and development targets. Coordinated action by the G20 to scale up sustainable infrastructure will send clear signals to investors and enhance confidence to mobilize the private sector investment further. Recovering stronger and together from the COVID-19 pandemic requires cooperation and actions from all parties. In this regard, G20 members have a strong commitment to contribute and support the transformative infrastructure on the road to global recovery. It is essential to improve countries' preparedness to anticipate the future economic and health challenges by examining long-term strategies, plans, and policies through Infra Tracker. We are aware that the COVID-19 pandemic also created a higher risk of divergence across regions by widening existing capacity disparities on infrastructure delivery among subnational governments and regions. Inequalities, poverty rates, and debt levels have worsened in many countries, thus exacerbating unequal access to vulnerable groups and underserved regions. It is an important issue that needs to be addressed soon to prevent us from the risk of lasting inequality that can threaten our ability to achieve long-term sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Despite the negative impacts of the infrastructure sector, COVID-19 pandemic has also offered the opportunity to step up digital transformation. Digital connectivity through the optimization of broadband and network, and the integration of technology in infrastructure through the adoption of the infratech is critical to enabling more cost-efficient and better quality infrastructure that is also resilient to future shocks. It is the government's responsibility to increase investments into digital infrastructure and scale up the adoption of the infratech. Thus, we can ensure investments and benefit all parties and contribute to social inclusion. The infrastructure development is delivered not only to help close the infrastructure gap, but also to contribute to broad goals in promoting a sustainable growth and development, generating economic efficiency, meeting sustainable development targets by considering environmental, resilience, inclusion, and good governance elements. Therefore, we need indicators to make sure the quality of the infrastructure investment. Considering the significant role of the infrastructure development in the achievement of global ambition, the G20 has a strong commitment to support a sustainable structure and ensure the long-term G20 infrastructure agenda could be well delivered. Indonesian presidency has set 4 priority agendas on infrastructure. The first, developing a framework on how to best leverage private sector participation to scale up sustainable infrastructure investment. While scaling up sustainable infrastructure investment will take several years, coordinated action by the G20 will send clear signals to investors, which would enhance confidence to further mobilize private sector investment into the sector. Secondly, developing a policy toolkit to mobilize innovative infrastructure financing mechanisms in regions and cities, including enhancing gender and social inclusion during the recovery, including examining the use of local bonds and enhancing gender and social inclusion through infrastructure investment. This policy action is to address the higher risk of discrepancies among regions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If left unaddressed, there is a risk of lasting inequality and economic scarring. Thirdly, exploring options to enable most cost-efficient, better quality digital infrastructure and use infratech. Since the onset of the pandemic, digitization and automation have accelerated as they facilitate remote working while reducing the need of physical contact. Concrete actions are required to increase investments into digital infrastructure and scale up the adoption of infratech. Fourth, advancing the InfraTracker 2.0 tool to provide insights into long-term infrastructure strategies and plans. The coverage of InfraTracker should be expanded to take stock of countries' preparedness in anticipating the challenges ahead. This includes current infrastructure investment activities, but also long-term strategies, plans, and policies, including infrastructure. Indonesia expects that the G20 principles of quality infrastructure investment will be endorsed. The principles are crucial in recognizing the importance of quality infrastructure investment to the ongoing effort to help close the infrastructure gap globally. Closing the infrastructure to leverage tools such as credit enhancements to create risk-adjusted investment opportunities, and the private sector to prioritize investments that adhere to environmental and social best practices. The combination of those three components will be very important to implement sustainable and inclusive infrastructure. Within the context of the G20, this collaboration will also send a clear message to the international community that G20 is working to address important issues faced by both developed and developing countries. This is all I can share with you today. Have a very constructive and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much, Pak Febrio, for this very comprehensive insight into both Indonesia's priorities and Indonesia as G20 presidency priorities regarding infrastructure. Ibu Nela, I think you wanted to propose that we make a group photo before we continue, right?
So to everyone, please open your video so we can take a screenshot of you. And please have a big smile and turn on your video, please. And then my colleague will take your picture. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I give the floor to you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with no further notice, a lot of elements have been put on the table. I suggest that we circulate about how to deliver on such an agenda across two ways today. That is, first, somehow a vision of future systems, and then how to operationalize future systems. With no further ado, I would like to pass it on to Ambassador Abhay Thakur from India, Additional Secretary for Economic Relations at the Ministry of External Affairs and G20 Sous Sherpa. Ambassador Thakur, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Nicholas. Thank you for introducing me. A very good afternoon and good day, good morning if to all the colleagues, from New Delhi. Namaste. Whenever I approach G20 issues, I would like to bring in a perspective that we like to constantly emphasize in the discourse, particularly when we approach post-pandemic reconstruction and recovery. Let me congratulate Indonesia on its theme, Recover Together, Recover Stronger. And to an extent, today's theme of post-pandemic infrastructure and global public goods is one of the key themes on which G20 discourse is going to be shaped as we go forward. I congratulate T20 for choosing this topic, which I think is very important. Let me, at the beginning, give some, contextual input from the policy point of view from India. When we talk of recovery and post-pandemic recovery and global public goods, we need to address the issue from both sides, from the demand side and from the supply side, which means we have to look at provision of infrastructure, increasing GDP growth in jobs, growth in economic activity. At the same time, we also have to look at sustainable lifestyles. We have to look at sustainable consumption patterns. We have to look at sustainable energy consumption, waste management, climate together with environment. And we need to look at issues in as holistic a manner as possible. So this is something that, coming from the Sherpa track, I understand that today's discussion is actually in many ways connected with the finance track. But coming on a more rounded and holistic perspective, This is a central message I would like to emphasize for consideration of T20, that while we talk of numbers of GDP, of roads and power projects and everything else, what the COVID pandemic has taught us is the importance of sustainable lifestyle, sustainable consumption. And whenever we talk of issues, whether they are energy or infrastructure or technology, we have to constantly remind ourselves of the importance of sustainable consumption. So this is a message, a central message I would like to convey on behalf of India whenever we are approaching global issues. And I think once again, I would say that we are very much in line with Indonesian priorities, because we are trying to approach a given problem from all possible angles and achieve holistic, all-round solutions. So this was what I wanted to say in the beginning. Let me speak a little bit about what precisely I think today's seminar on post-pandemic infrastructure and global public goods means to us. I would say that growing interconnectedness has increased the number of common challenges that are faced by the global community. Climate change, epidemic, security risks, financial crisis, all pose an increasing threat to stability and living standards everywhere. While they affect all of us, those living in the poorest nations with little or no personal savings, no social safety nets, or on government assistance programs, on emergency assistance programs, have nothing to fall back on, they are the most vulnerable. So when we are talking of post-pandemic infrastructure and global public good, we have to keep the last mile, the most vulnerable sections of the society in mind and accord them the highest priority. I would add that the importance of global public goods in various fields is an essential safety net for equitable and sustainable future progress, and is vital for reduction of poverty and inequality across and within countries. Like public goods at the local and national level, standard economic theory suggests that global public goods will be underfunded, because in a world of sovereign nations, no single nation can capture fully the benefit of its own spending on a global good, so to say. There is need for substantially increasing the financing for global public goods, especially in infrastructure, as infrastructure is the backbone of the economy. There is a high direct correlation between infrastructure and sustainable growth. For achieving strong, sustainable, balanced economic growth, I would emphasize that infrastructure provision and financing need a paradigm shift in all dimensions, in narrative, design, financing, and execution. We all talk of catchphrases: build back better, or rebuilding and recovering. We also need to while we do this, make sure that we take a holistic look at what are we building back, to what extent, because there has been a paradigm shift during the pandemic times. Education has changed in many ways. Health and health architecture is changing in many ways. Digital infrastructure has become much more important. The importance of physical infrastructure has, relatively speaking, has evolved. So we need to keep these aspects in mind, and we need to always constantly think that we build infrastructure, but we build it with new ideas, with new approaches, so that we have in mind sustainable lifestyle and sustainable consumption, inclusive growth for all together. So let me at this stage now come to some of the initiatives by India in this area. For India to reach the goal of US dollar 5 trillion in GDP by 24-25, we need to spend about 1.4 trillion in building infrastructure. We have been undertaking various initiatives. In particular, I would like to mention the National Infrastructure Pipeline, National Monetization Scheme, and several innovative financing mechanisms. For example, Infrastructure Investment Trust, the Real Estate Investment Trust, hybrid annuity model, land value capture, non-fair revenue box solutions to support and bridge financing gap. While financing issues are being addressed through multiple ways, a new approach is being adopted towards infrastructure development in India. Recently, the Indian Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, launched the PM Gati Shakti program. Gati Shakti is translated into something like speed and power, which means doing things faster with greater energy, which is a holistic approach and which I was talking about earlier, and will focus on planning, innovative financing, use of technology, and speedier implementation of projects. Under this program, we are building 84,000 kilometers of roads to decongest traffic passing through cities, connect rural areas, and enhance logistic efficiency. Under our port program called Sagarmala, we are envisaging development of ports, modernization, and industrialization, a novel scheme for harnessing potential in the ocean and coastal sectors. There has been a huge jump of investment in water and sanitation sector. Again, when we talk of holistic infrastructure, this is very critical. What we are calling piped water, Nal Se Jal scheme over the next 5 years is a very pragmatic step towards social infrastructure. The green energy corridor aims at integrating renewable energy in the overall power generation mix of India. Government has introduced production-linked incentive scheme, a national program on high-efficiency solar PV modules to support and promote manufacturing of high-efficiency solar modules. At the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019, and again, this is very important area which we are going to further focus on during our presidency, is the one of disaster resilient infrastructure. So at the UN Climate Action Summit, we announced a coalition on disaster resilient infrastructure with a vision of enabling measurable reduction in infrastructure losses from disasters, including extreme climate events. Currently, 29 countries and 7 international organizations are members of this coalition. There has been this COVID-19 pandemic. Disasters have struck many parts of the world over the years. And we need to ensure that natural disasters, the toll taken by them is minimized to minimize the impact on global economy and growth. So this is where the importance of CDRI comes in. India would be working towards a new track, a new working group on disaster risk reduction during our presidency. With respect to digital infrastructure, we have embarked on a mission of seamless digital connectivity across sectors. The Indian Unique ID scheme, which is well known across the world now, called Aadhaar, which is really enabled retail payment revolution, mobile-based applications for farmers, students, women, MSMEs under the umbrella JAM Trinity, is not only providing a range of financial and public services to ordinary people, but have significantly empowered them. The low data cost in India, the high internet penetration, and a unified payment interface really has enabled a huge, inclusive growth that is happening across the 1.3 billion population of India. And we are the, strong believers in the importance of digital infrastructure, which is really helping inclusive and all-round growth of India. This is another area which we will be focusing on and we would keep emphasizing the importance of data for development in this context, in addition to all the other factors that are considered when we talk about using and promoting data for economic and social growth. There are a few initiatives that India has undertaken to bridge the gaps in the infrastructure sector. Coming to the topic of G20 agenda of quality and resilient infrastructure, the G20 adopted principles of quality infrastructure investment in 2019 that were further refined under Saudi Arabian and Italian presidencies. I am happy to say that the priorities of Indonesia's G20 presidency build upon the tenet that good infrastructure is the foundation for sustainable economy and is key to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its goals. I hope that we as G20 would be able to come up with tangible outcomes on this front. In the end, I would like to make a few suggestions. Policymakers need to prioritize projects that can deliver jobs and growth in the short and medium term. The focus should be on projects already in pipeline with clear planning and environmental approvals. Interventions should be timely, targeted, and temporary. The IMF's TTT principle. The new narrative on infrastructure finance must focus on optimal leveraging of existing sources of infrastructure finance. This includes institutional sources such as pension funds and other long-term instruments with a view to recover from pandemic-induced economic downturn. Governments need to properly estimate and budget the life cycle consequences of investments. Stimulus packages should aim to advance decarbonization, social equity, and resilience. During India's presidency, we aspire to continue to make G20 a platform where both the developed and developing countries engage and understand each other's perspectives and help bridge the gaps between the different pathways to solving global challenges and together come up with meaningful solutions. Our focus will be to steer the narrative of the G20 towards strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth and lay down comprehensive action plans and frameworks to secure a positive G20 legacy. With these remarks, I thank the organizers for inviting me to this very important event today. We look forward to staying engaged. I wish today's deliberations all success and look forward to your continued support during the Indonesian presidency and moving forward to ours. Thank you, namaste, and all success to everyone.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this very comprehensive overview of the vision of infrastructure priorities from India and in sync with the Indonesian G20. This is very, very precious and valuable material. It was mentioned several times in the opening statement of Pak Febrio and yourself, the link with private investors, the private sector, and so on, especially when it comes to ICT. I wish to also very much underline that this session today was prepared in close coordination, if not hand-to-hand, with the B20, right? The group of businesses in the G20. And somehow these different streams, ministerial and the think tanks and the B20, that is the engagement groups, right, allows to, at this moment, have a rather open discussions and consider the different options. I'm aware of time. We have only 2 hours today. With the richness and the diversity of the topics, we would probably need much more, but I'm sure there will be other opportunities in the coming weeks and months. I would like to pass it on to Rasha Al-Marzouki, Chief Economic Advisor at the Ministry of Economy and Planning of Saudi Arabia, also for a few opening comments. Rasha, please, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Nicholas. Aware of time, so I'll try to make it short. Have more liquidity in the market with also the problem in supply chain and all other effects that put a pressure on the inflation and put us in these positions where we'll have a macroeconomics issue that to deal with it, it might have a negative impact and even infrastructure investment. In addition to that, also as been mentioned by a study by the IMF, there is a waste on money that's spent on infrastructure, where, as they estimated, a third what has been invested in infrastructure can be saved and can, as a result, reduce the taxation or use in different also infrastructure. And they mentioned in the case of low-income countries, it's more than maybe 50% is the waste. So we need to tackle these issues. With that also, as been mentioned and in several studies and report, the amount of money that we need to inject in infrastructure to at least have a quality and the minimum requirement that need to reach the global goals, it's going to be more than $6 trillion till 2030. So if we consider this amount of money with a lot of this problem, with the fiscal space now government has, then there is no other options except to try to get the private sector in and to improve the transparency, accountability, and governance. The IMF in their report, they mentioned more than 50% of this waste can be saved if we improve governance. So it's an issue that related to this three angles, the transparency, accountability, and governance, that will help. So bringing the private sector and designing public-private partnership in a way that will help us to improve the quality of infrastructure and also to save this waste of money that's been invested as a result of public investment, and also tackling an important and required infrastructure for our globe to be connected and to maintain the higher growth and improve people's life down the road. It's an essential and cannot be reached by the government alone. So the dialogue and continuous dialogue, and maybe also continue discussing and helping the private sector through either the regulations and also sometime improving the quality of the transparency, the information that provided, and the bankable of a pipeline of infrastructure that can be prepared, so the private sector will be able to see the future and be able to also select where they're going to put their money. So with this, and also with the move now from conventional economy, which now, as we in the fourth industrial revolution, going to move more to a digital economy, then the requirement to improve such kind of infrastructure, have more digital economy related infrastructure, that to make it more easier and also improve the quality of infrastructure that connected our globe, as essential. Because the problem which I think now it's been faced, some country, they are better now stage of digital economy infrastructure, while other not yet, and this is will have an equality down the road, either in the global level and in the level of people inside these countries. So the need to improve the policy and regulation for digital economy, improve the ICT investment, as Nicholas mentions, where they closely working with this group, the G20, and also prepare for the future pandemics. We noticed now with this pandemics how much is costing us as a globe, and R&D needed in this case to react. Where with the R&D, with spending more money for R&D to innovate and be ready to react for any future pandemic, will be very helpful to reduce the cost on all of us. So the extra money that we invested either in health side or in education and also R&D and in required infrastructure will be kind of an insurance for us to reduce the cost of pandemic that we will gonna face in the future at any time. So our response, if we have ready institutions that research and come up with the right idea and solution, our react will be very quick, and the cost in our globe will be less, which will improve the growth of the economy very quick and get us out of such a pandemic and maybe prevent it before it's reaching us. With that, I'd like to thank you, Nicholas, and the organizer for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rajat. These were also very important points. The issue of R&D, I know, has been mentioned several times since the beginning. It's a sign that something has to be done into also really crafting future infrastructure systems. It's not just an issue of financial engineering. We have to look forward. And I like also your approach of infrastructure investments as an insurance for future pandemics. And I think this does connect very much accurately with the theme of today's discussions about connecting infrastructure and global public goods. Thank you very much, Raja. With no further ado, I would turn to Rida Veerakusuma, the chair of the B20 Infrastructure and Financing Task Force. The floor is yours, and we will try to share the floor with the discussants then in about 8 minutes, if this is fine by you. But the floor is definitely yours, and I know that also as a president of the Indonesia Sovereign Wealth Fund, you must have a number of strong messages that you would like to share with us today. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Given the fact that we're running out of time, I'll be more than happy to skip my speech and we just go to the discussion.
No, please go on. I'm sure you have a few points that would be worth sharing.
Joking aside, obviously, good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. My name is Rida Veerakusuma. I'm the chair of the Business 20 or B20 Finance and Infrastructure Task Force, as well as the CEO of Indonesia Investment Authority, or better known as INA, Indonesia Sovereign Wealth Fund. I'll talk about three things today. One is just to give you a highlight on the introduction of our task force. I will introduce our co-chairs, the composition of our members, and perhaps highlighting some of our preliminary priorities. Number two, I'd like to try to link to the past B20s and G20s as best as I can. Maybe you can actually help me in this regard. But the idea is perhaps we could just learn and perhaps develop and take what has been done by the past team rather than reinventing the wheels. And that's the reason why I thought it would be useful to also look to the past and see if there are things that already been thought of rather than thinking through yet again. And number three, maybe we'll share a little bit about, what our task force are thinking ahead. So let me just begin. The first one, our B20 Finance and Infrastructure Task Force of Indonesia, we're very fortunate to have a team of distinguished co-chairs. Let me just mention all of them because they're actually very, very distinguished people. Number one is Mr. Marc-André Blanchard. He's the Executive Vice President of CDPQ Canada, as well as the head of CDPQ Global. As you know, CDPQ is the pension fund of Quebec, Canada, one of the largest pension funds in the world with over $460 billion Canadian dollars in asset management. Number two is Mr. John Denton. He's the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. I believe he's an extremely well-known quantity. He has been members of G20 initiatives for many years. Number three is Madame Hu Xiaolian. She is the chairman of the Export-Import Bank of China. Number four is Mr. Vladimir Primak. He is the investment director at the Russian Direct Investment Fund, or RDIF. This is Russia Sovereign Wealth Fund. Number five is Mr. Mark Tucker, who is the group chairman of HSBC Holding or HSBC Bank. Number 6 is Mr. Benway. He's the group head of Macquarie Asset Management. As you know, Macquarie is one of the largest investment banks in the infrastructure. And number 7 is Mr. Bill Winters. He is the group CEO of Standard Chartered Bank. In addition to those 7 distinguished co-chairs, we also are supported by 114 members from 22 countries that cover 17 industries. So our task force are blessed with not only pretty strong co-chairs, but also pretty strong members who seems to be extremely interested in ensuring that our work is supported with strong advocacies and thoughts, because infrastructures, as I will explain later, it's an important factor if you really wanted to make humankind have a better life going forward. We just had our inception meeting a few weeks ago. We have not even had our first task force meeting as yet. Our first one will be next week. So please forgive me if what I will be talking to you is what I call very preliminary key priorities. We only have 3. The first one is we wanted to improve. We say we want to improve access to affordable and suitable sources of financing. We talk a lot about how can we develop cheaper, more accessible long-term finance for infrastructure projects, whether it is using blended financing, private sector participation, reducing investment barriers, trying to find ways to attract financing, especially international financing from various sources, and quite a number of things. Again, as I mentioned, I'll be a little bit tentative because we're just beginning our work. Our second priority is to actually drive collaborations between high and middle income countries to work towards net zero carbon emissions. Our goal is to make recommendations that increase the pool of funds for green infrastructure, perhaps help investment climate for decarbonization projects and businesses, increase the development of viable green infrastructure projects, and so on and so forth. And third priority is to accelerate the development of digital and smart infrastructure. So we actually only have 3 things we think are important as a straw man. Obviously, as I mentioned to you, we have so many inputs and feedback from our co-chairs, their working teams, as well as our members. Now, our work, as I said, is just at the beginning of it. If you look at the past effort, I mean, maybe I can just highlight the B20 finance and infrastructure in Italy, which was developed during the beginning of the general recovery from the pandemic. We still, I think, are in the middle of the pandemic. They came up with 4 key recommendations, 15 policies. For example, they came up with recommendations in sustainable finance and financial inclusion, specific policies on infrastructure financing. They mentioned a lot about growth engines and where they are coming from, as well as recommendations around global regulatory environment. There are 15 policies on 4 key recommendations, which includes all kinds of things that the G20 can potentially adopt and then recommend to all of its members. So we are paying a lot of attention to what the B20 in Italy have done. A lot of those recommendations, or maybe all of those recommendations, are something that we should take forward. We should think through, and we may actually decide as a group to focus on certain key implementable and meaningful recommendations that we could take to G20. I wanted to also highlight in 2019, the 1 year before Italy, in Japan, interestingly enough, the G20 mentioned something about quality infrastructure investment principles, which actually include 6 points. Number one is to maximize the positive impact of infrastructure to achieve sustainable growth and development, raising economic efficiency in view of life cycle cost. And there's a number of principles, but infrastructure is really something that people are mentioning as the key factors that will change human life. I wanted to actually highlight a couple of very interesting data. And this is, I think, is one of the things that I wanted to say, that if you look at the global competitiveness index, there's a huge difference between those that actually have developed infrastructures and those that don't yet develop infrastructures. And it's actually quite telling that if you were to divide G20 into the high income countries at an average GDP of 40,000 US dollars, or the middle income or lower income country members of the G20, which is around 7,000, the infrastructure developments are quite uneven. And if you look at infrastructure spending overall globally, over 60% actually goes to the developed nations, which arguably, you say maybe it should be a little bit more towards the, middle or lower income countries. But there lies, I think, some of the things that we need to also look into. Now, Indonesia is the very first sort of middle income, lower income countries that leads the presidencies, which will be followed by India and Brazil. So I'll be spending a little bit more time about how we should probably look at infrastructure somewhat differently, because you could talk about infrastructure, whether it's transport infrastructure, logistics, or power and energy, or waste management, or healthcare. But I think we as a group need to think about in India or in Indonesia, people, some areas, they don't even have toll roads, they don't even have power. Whereas in some countries, people talk about, let's think about changing it from fossil fuels to green energy. So I think that dichotomy we probably need to somehow address. The other things that I also wanted to mention on the discussion is the cooperations between G20, B20, D20, or even T20. I think I would like to say that there's a number of guiding principles, if I may offer. One is the partnership, the collaboration, the cooperation is a must, so as not to duplicate work, as well as to synergize and enhance impact of everyone's work. However, having said that, we must first begin with each of our own responsibilities. Like, for example, within ourselves, our task force, I have to work with my 7 other co-chairs, the 114 members, to make sure that we can not only take the inputs from them, but also discuss, cultivate, enhance, foster, enrich those recommendations to make impactful and meaningful recommendations to G20. Once we have finished our work, we then have to align within the B20 task force and then to the G20 and the T20. But one of the things I want to highlight to you is that I think we have to make sure that each of us play our own role. Like, for example, B20, ourselves at the business community should ensure that what we look at is probably more on the business perspective. On the G20, it's probably more on the policies. But the collaboration has to be there. But B20 recommendations shouldn't sound like G20 recommendations. I think it would be so much enriching if we also bring in what we think, at least from the business point of view, an implementable and executable recommendations that will make a difference in building infrastructure. One of the things that we learned a lot in our early work days is that infrastructure is a big word. Everybody think about it. Everybody knows that how important it is. But there are too much money floating around, maybe in the high income countries, and too little monies that can actually take too little projects or too little bankable projects in the emerging nations, that those money cannot flow in. I give you an example. In Indonesia, a toll road concession is 40, 50 years. Yet the banks can only lend 10 years, 15 years. So there's a huge gap. So I think we would like to be able to somehow bridge those challenges and then recommend something that will hopefully make a difference in really fulfilling the need of the G20 countries overall. I think there has to be a win-win solutions between high income, middle income. For high income that actually has a lot of savings, for them to use the middle income need as a source of growth rather than putting their savings in a lower yielding assets, for example. But the middle income countries, for example, have to ensure that the projects are bankable. Some of the input is that projects in the less developed nations oftentimes are not legally sound, oftentimes are not very bankable. And it's also extremely interesting to find out, if you look at the debt per GDP of the so-called high-income countries, they're actually higher. Like Greece, for example, is 200, 300% in debt to GDP. Indonesia is 30%. And yet, Greece would be able to borrow money at a lot cheaper rates than India or Indonesia. So there's this whole dichotomy that we would love to be able to connect and see if there are policies that the government or the G20 can somehow help, so that whatever we dream in ensuring that those infrastructure build up in the areas that are needed can actually be executed more seamlessly and in a much better way.
Yes, yeah.
I think I'll stop there. I don't want to talk too much about being too controversial, but what I would like to leave behind is that we have so much things to solve and we need everyone to work together, but we need to recognize
Conversation in the coming weeks and months. Irina?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in very interesting discussion. I would like to add a few words to development of main topics of the seminar. After lockdown, after epidemiological crisis, countries have begun to restore develop socio-economic infrastructure. At the same time, the main questions is to what extent the desire of state and companies to quickly compensate for economic profits and incomes that are lost due to the pandemic will contradict the environmental and social objectives of society. It's clear that over the past 2.5 years, the share of investment in the creation and modernization of social infrastructure dominate the total volume of financial investments. I mean the facility of healthcare system that provide medical and preventive, sanitary and epidemiological rehabilitation, diagnostic support. Undoubtedly, that founding has given rise a surge to development of biological technology, genetic engineering, pharmaceutical, telemedicine, robotics, biochemistry. $44 billion spent on healthcare innovation worldwide in 2021. It's very important that this year, maybe next year, will be a period for evaluation the effectiveness of all investment in infrastructure development. There is hope that new infrastructure has been born in that of fight against coronavirus, primarily in the healthcare sector. This infrastructure should provide a minimum loss from pandemics, taking account spread and chronic diseases from transferred COVID, in deterioration of health of population as whole, divided treatment and prevention for different age categories, geographical racial differences, be socially oriented, accessible to rich and poor people and countries, protect vulnerable groups of population, avoid corruption and unfair business competition when obtaining funds for health protection. To be friendly to human and natural environment, because waste-free, because today there is huge increase in medical waste, plastic, chemical reagents, etc. Every day more than 2 kilograms of medical waste falls on each person. Thank you very much for my remarks. It's I dominate my speech for today.
Thank you very much. No, this point specifically on health and social infrastructure and access and pandemic preparedness and future pandemic preparedness, etc. That definitely goes in the issue not only of health but also of health as a global public good and related issues. So I think we will be able to build further on that. Thank you very much, Irina. I will turn to Christian Wertley, probably with a different outlook on environmental issues. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicholas. I have to say, I mean, a lot of very important things already have been mentioned, and I might pick up on one or two. However, the number one risk for the global economy is climate change. Let's face it, I mean, projections are from the Swiss Re Institute. There was a report we released last year that if we actually continue on our current trajectory, that will have a negative impact of around 10% on global GDP up to 2050. Now, if temperatures are going to rise by 3.2 degrees, that will be an 18% loss of global GDP. So climate change is really the thing to tackle. And that brings me to the infrastructure solution. So whatever we do in infra, we have to think what impact it has, how resilient it is, and how sustainable those solutions are. We also were speaking about biodiversity. Again, climate change is one of the big issues that triggers that. However, pollution, habitat loss, over exploration are others. And I think whenever we build something, I think we should actually consider these ESG components much more closely. The second point I want to mention is it's a collective effort. So basically, public sector, private sector, and academia has to come together. We need actually science-driven research that provides us with the right data. We need to create awareness for the most important issues, whether that's social infrastructure, whether it's accessibility, whether it's water sanitation. And then we need actions that are actually, that have an impact. I very much liked the point that Mr. Rakchariku made. I hope I completely get that wrong name right. I completely apologize. However, I think it goes into the completely right direction. We need frameworks, we need policy toolkit, and so on. So we need actually to reduce the hurdles for private capital to flow into emerging markets. Very often it has to do with standardization and contract certainty and regulatory certainty. And that's an issue we actually have to address collectively. Another point I want to make, scaling and standardization will be key in order to get more money into infrastructure. Now, what role does the insurance industry actually play? First of all, I mean, we create awareness of the issues that are actually around. Secondly, the whole industry actually holds around 30 trillion of asset under management that can be invested in infrastructure. So we need the right incentive and the nice frameworks in order to do that. And then thirdly, and most importantly, the insurance industry is actually a shock absorber for losses, for risks. So we are actually the ones who actually are willing to take risks on certain projects. So my point is get the industry involved earlier on to see how we can de-risk projects in order to make them more bankable. There are traditional solutions there. I mean, everybody knows about construction, engineering, maintenance, operation core. However, the industry also provides tailor-made, customized, innovative solutions that then unlock finance and enable projects. So again, Nicholas, I think it's a collective effort, and all the discussions we have here go into the right direction. But at the end of the day, we need action. We need action to make it happen, and we need it fast, because all these global issues we see, they are only going to accelerate, and we are running slowly out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. This is very clear and also very strong. I will now ask our colleague Dr. Priyadashi Dash also to share briefly a few remarks about what you have heard so far in the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll just be very brief in the interest of time. You know, all our speakers so far have underlined one dimension which is clearly emerging, that the digital future is the future for infrastructure provision, planning, monitoring, and all sorts of things. And we don't have to be surprised that the future infrastructure stock, when we measure, would be expressed in digital units, be it developed countries or developing countries. So there is a need for seamless integration of the physical infrastructure with the digital infrastructure. And this new narrative that we are emphasizing, to be holistic, integrated, must factor this digital layer efficiently, and to see that how we can harness that digital component optimally, efficiently, in a cost-effective manner, so that we deliver the basic minimum, public good to the people. I'll explicitly focus on the fintech segment, which we call financial technology. This fintech infrastructure, which has grown very rapidly in the recent years across the countries, regardless of the level of development, is because there is no fixed investment, huge fixed investment. You just need to hire some people with good knowledge about the financial industry, develop some app, and try to imagine the kind of customized solutions you provide. Now, can fintech be an infrastructure provision if we put that in the quality and resilient infrastructure? I will argue that we see that happening in India and in other places. Now, what it does, it blends the conventional banking and financial solutions in a way which reduces the cumbersome documentation, makes it consumer friendly, and at a lower cost. The cost of internet provision is also going down because people are availing these facilities on smartphones, or the cost of the smartphones overall has gone down. Now, if this is a platform, what do we achieve? For example, MSMEs visiting the banks, spending time, and the bank branches are crowded. Now they have to just log into a startup platform, put the request for certain working capital, and meet the KYC norms. They will be offered the working capital. Now, can we trust these platforms? What type of transparency mechanism should be put in so that the startups do not manipulate the access to digital information that they have? Now, one would argue that what about those who have relatively low access to the digital infrastructure? Bringing this digital divide dimension, which is a serious issue to consider. But by and large, if you see that the average citizens of a country benefiting from these fintech solutions is increasingly being manifested. We have seen in the rural areas of India where they were struggling to understand the financial solutions. Forget about the derivative market and other things. The basic financial services, they are now empowered, and that has prompted them to explore further on the digital platforms. So there is a greater scope for that. What type of regulation, how much of data sharing should happen? G20 has already thought about it, and we can take it to the next level. So in the interest of the time, I'll stop here. If there is any scope, we can discuss it further. Thank you for the opportunity. Back to you, Dr. Niruplas.
Thank you very much for mentioning the issue of the rural development in the context of overall development, and also the issue of seamless integration of digital and physical and social infrastructure and the support to MSMEs. I think this is something that is outstandingly important, not just in Southeast Asia or in South Asia or India, but also globally. Thank you very much again to our discussants and speakers for this first segment of the discussion. I would now like to continue to the second segment, which was meant initially to be more about how to operationalize somehow this notion of the global public goods. We have heard a number of very strong calls to get straight into action, but also we understand that there are a number of profound system transformations that need to be addressed. May I ask to upload the video recording of President Francesco Profumo, former lead co-chair of G20 Italy Infrastructure Task Force and president of Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo. Then we will hear from Raffaele Della Croce, senior economist at OECD, and from Sebastian Vinges about multilateral development banks for public goods. Please, the video recording of Francesco Profumo.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's really my pleasure to be with you today. In the last years and a half, as the lead co-chair of the T20 Task Force on Infrastructure Investment and Financing for the T20 in Italy, and as the co-chair for this year T20 Indonesia, I had the opportunity to share ideas and goals laying ahead with a wide range of stakeholders. Today, in the spirit of the G20, I want to push emphasis on the importance of positive infrastructure development for long-term solutions to pressing social, economic, and environmental challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the world. To successfully respond to the current situation, we can no longer afford the usual approach to infrastructure. To support a post-pandemic, sustainable and long-term recovery, we must leverage investments in quality infrastructure that can respond to modern challenges. This means climate change, population growth, resources, rich and the poor people, and increasing attention to social outcomes, taking a people-first and approach will ensure all citizens have equal access to the infrastructure services they need, ally in achieving sustainability position. Thanks to innovations, systemic vulnerability in the infrastructure sector, bringing into focus the need for a more ambitious approach to preparedness. Leaders must now look ahead to ensure that the world is ready for the next major global health threats. The first and the foremost, through strong and resilient health systems, and by ensuring global surveillance. This means investing in infrastructure that are able to monitor and respond to threats as early as possible. But it is also crucial the need for greater and longer-term investment in R&D and the important role that a well-functioning supply chain can play in situations of crisis. Equally important is a strong end to transparencies. And how do we move forward? With the solid financing commitments, an ambitious global agenda, and a strong political will to implement a set of new globally agreed norms and standards to guide the infrastructure investments. The G20 is the right forum for taking on these pressing global challenges.
And it's the beginning of our session across those two dimensions. So thank you very much for Professor Profumo. Let me also just remind that for the T20, Professor Anang Parikesit is the lead co-chair with University Gadjah Mada in Indonesia, and is also the lead co-chair with University Gadjah Mada in Indonesia, built upon. Raffaele Della Croce, you were part of these discussions for many years. You are one of investors group. About this discussion, and especially about ways potentially to further connect infrastructure investment, the G20, and the wide and emerging issue of global goods. The floor is yours, Raffaele.
Nicola, and as suggested by Nicola, I was trying to make a few connections about G20 work with the T20, B20, and D20 other initiatives. Starting with the work from last year on resilient infrastructure construction and operation, but also the focus on adaptation, the need to make infrastructure resilient now and for the future, given the increasing impact of climate change. But also the recurrent issues, structural issues about infrastructure, which are the lack of efficiency, was mentioned before, the 1/3 of investment which is wasted, and even more so in developing countries. So how to connect the two together, this climate change urgency and efficiency sort of a priority in infrastructure, where we were advocating for a new governance approach to infrastructure, a systemic approach looking at the different sectorial issues from a whole of government perspective through the life cycle. This is building on OECD recommendation on governance for infrastructure, and then more importantly, including the role of infratech, new technologies. And this is work we keep on working on at the country level, looking at the implementation and challenges the countries are facing today as an asset class. That goes back a few years. Under the Australian presidency, we developed some high-level principles for long-term investment financing. And since then, work has developed to G20, B20, and several other G20 bodies to support this agenda. The momentum is there. Investors are under pressure for the lack of opportunities, for the need to match their long-term liabilities if we're talking about long-term investors, such as pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, or insurers. And there is a push to look into ESG from the new cohort of people actually subscribing to their portfolio and investment assets. So clearly there is a big opportunity, but we are not there about finding the right model. There is probably an oversupply of financing, and clearly beyond the model, the financing model, there is the infrastructure model, which is not found yet, is not working. So how can we come together? Is probably a governance issue. We need to start with the setting the project pipeline right, building for the future according to our policy objectives, which are resilience and climate objectives beyond social and sustainability, and including the private sector, of course, private sector financing. And the third dimension, which I think is interesting for the discussion, because this comes across G20, B20, T20 work, which we have been involved with the Italian and the current Indonesian presidency, is nature-based solution, and green infrastructure, which is what we're talking about are a specific projects such as ecological corridors along major infrastructure projects, coastal protection through nature, or urban-based sort of green parks, green roof, which implies a planning, a land and landscape planning and strategic planning ahead to integrate green solution along gray solution. So it's a radical change in the way we think about infrastructure, which is a long-term investment, we know, and something which has not been done up to now. And I think the G20 has to play a role through all these bodies, through the T20 and B20 and so forth, in bringing along this message, which we need to do things differently. And from what I hear today, clearly that's something that Indonesians, but also Indian, as we said, as was said, disaster risk management is going to be a major priority for next year as well. Is a way to keep this good work, which was done in the past, relevant for the future, without reinventing the wheel.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. This is perfectly clear again, and this shows also the value of having both the conversations that are focused on a number of issues at each time, but also to have also a continued stream of reflections on major topics. With no further ado, I would like to ask Sebastian Winges maybe also to comment on that. And you are maybe the one among all of us the most advanced in addressing the issue of public goods. So how would you, I would say, position the discussion of today and the infrastructure issue in the wider context of these emerging sets of issues regarding public goods investments? Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you for the flowers. Well, we have talked today a lot about the big challenges and the great crisis that we are facing these days. The climate change, obviously the pandemic, the biodiversity and nature crisis, security crisis, financial crisis. What all these crises have in common is that in an increasingly interconnected world, the prosperity and growth of individual countries depend on such crisis, on such global crisis, increasingly. And all these crises have cross-border effects. They basically have international externalities that define the growth prospects of other countries, of all countries. And to invest in the preparedness against such crises actually means, to a large degree, to invest in sustainable infrastructure. Over 90% of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals, depend on infrastructure. So the question here is really, how can we channel the needed funds, the needed financing into sustainable infrastructure in order to overcome the infrastructure investment gap? And the challenge here is that since these are investments into something that has international externalities, they are systematically under-invested in. And that's the problem of global public goods. We depend more and more on them, but the incentives to invest in them, the incentives to invest in sustainable infrastructure are systematically too low. So there are systematic incentives for free riding, actually. So, and that calls for multilateral action, for collective action of in multilateral systems, in multilateral institutions like the G20, but also in multilateral institutions like the multilateral development banks, the UN system, and so on. And that sort of brings us to what I would call the triangle of the hardwired triangle of sustainable development, of global public goods as the goal as well as the foundation for sustainable development and sustainable growth, infrastructure as the second corner of the triangle, as the basis for global public goods, and the multilateral institutions as the actors, as the agents of change that must facilitate the collective action and incentivize investments, channeling the needed financing into the infrastructure to provide and protect the needed global public goods. Okay, in the interest of time, I think I stop here and rather hand over to the discussants to have a little more time for the discussion. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you very much. What we can see is today that we just lightly touched upon the vastness of the issues of this question of public goods. I will keep from your points something probably which is absolutely critical, that is the interactions between the factors, the intersections between different sets of issues, where a lot of value can be added or lost, right, in processes of addressing transformations. But this is undervalued. The costs of this is not clear. It generally slips through. That is something, especially if we connect with what our colleagues from India mentioned and the priorities of the G20 Indonesia, sorry, for a while globally. How would you consider this, the maturity of this debate globally and in multilateral institutions, and according to core issues such as infrastructure investments? The floor is yours. Professor Bilindo.
Thank you, everybody. In fact, I was very keenly following the discussion, but maybe you may not mind if I start with an operational definition of public goods and what does it imply. The public good is intended to be non-exclusive, meaning they are to be accessed by everybody. And when we talk about global public good, the implications are that we are going to create some assets which will be accessed by everybody and nobody can be excluded from that. And that is perhaps the spirit of inclusive development. And that's why global public good, to ensure that no one is left behind and go for an inclusive development process, is a very important requirement today. And this is also very important from the perspective about a question that I am having for quite some time. And Mr. Ridha raised that issue very clearly. Is infrastructure an output of development process, or is infrastructure to be considered as an input for development process? But the way Mr. Ridha argued, it is found that more developed countries have more infrastructure, giving an indication that perhaps it is an output of development. If you are more developed, you have more infrastructure. But the policies are now necessary to be changed, that infrastructure has to be considered at an operational level as an input for development. And then only we can have an inclusive development and sustainable development that we are talking about. And in this context, I would like to link the whole issue of international development cooperation in the process of developing infrastructure. What is now being argued in the literature is that development cooperation model has to move beyond the existing model of country-specific development cooperation. It is being pillars of development cooperation today if we really want to move forward to an era of inclusive development. The three pillars are country-specific development cooperation for creating global public good, meaning the goods that can be accessed by anybody and everybody in the world, and thirdly, necessary funds for creating capacity to absorb future shocks. So these are the three requirements, three components now necessary in our global developmental cooperation infrastructure. And these issues have come out very clearly that applies to health infrastructure, education infrastructure, digital infrastructure, then science and technology infrastructure. Because if all these issues are brought under global public good system and investments are made accordingly, then only we will be able to link up the complementarity between physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, which has been talked by several speakers here today. And from that perspective, there are ideas which are floating in terms of global public investment. It's a type of an investment which can be made in such a manner that everyone contributes to this investment process and everyone benefits. And this is the fundamental process that perhaps is required right now. And if we can do that, then the under provision of global public good can also be taken care of, because the fundamental problem with public good is the concern for free riding. But if you can develop a process, a system, and operationalize it, where everyone contributes and everyone benefits, then the chances of under provision because of free riding can also be eliminated. So my understanding is that now, in the context of infrastructure development, in the context of linking up physical and social infrastructure, there is perhaps not much options left but to go for global public investment where everyone contributes and everyone benefits according to their capacity. And through that process, raise the level of stock of global public goods, which can lead us to inclusive development and increase in global welfare completely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, perfectly clear points and foundations for an upcoming, I would say, necessary dialogues and light also that can be shed in a different manner to our sometimes very technical issues of infrastructure. The floor is yours, Yannick, for a couple of maybe not concluding, but last remarks as a discussant. You have heard many points, but it would be interesting then about this public goods, the issue of the environment, natural-based solutions, biodiversity, multilateral approaches. What would be your couple of takeaways points at this moment before we pass it on to Minister Sudarto for a couple of closing remarks? Yannick.
Thank you, Nicolas. What a challenge to be the last one to take the floor. So thank you for the invitation. And really, many things have been also highlighted during former presentations by all the speakers. I will also just highlight one word that has been also like a red line during the whole discussion. It was the holistic approach. Since more than a decade that I'm working on this topic, really this word has taken really more and more central point to the reflection on sustainable infrastructure and how we can also work on a complex topic in a complex way. But to achieve this goal, we need also to think really in a long term and to develop new tools to be able to achieve really the different goals that we want also to be taken by infrastructure. we have also to be very aware on the environmental impact of infrastructure, not only on climate change, but also on biodiversity. And it was well highlighted by different speakers that we need also to make a balance in our choices on the whole life cycle. Analysis of infrastructure needs also to be taken into account at each step of the process. At different level, at national, regional, or international scale, we can see that many initiatives have really raised up in recent times to be able to tackle those challenges in a common approach. But really, we need also to continue in this way to deepen public-private approaches. We need also to coordinate more closely research and innovation to develop new tools to be able to achieve really the holistic approach that we need also to develop. And what is currently ongoing with the United Nations Environmental Programme, with the preparation of Declaration for Sustainable Infrastructure that will be published next month, if I'm right, will be really very central point for the future. And we need also to take into account what comes from research side, also to orientate our fundings in a sustainable way. IPCC and IBES have already said that we need to work closely together on those two topics. And if we want to ensure in a longer term approach to have really sustainable infrastructure, we need also to promote research and to entangle it with its usage on the field. So thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you very much for reminding us of those priorities and the fact that a number of issues regarding the transformation of infrastructure systems are being dealt with at a multilateral level. And there is I would say, a rolling agenda that is accelerating, especially within the United Nations Environmental Programme, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, and within the negotiations also, which are ongoing regarding the so-called post-2020 a global biodiversity framework. So these are also insights to take into considerations. Minister Sudarto, if you allow me in 60 seconds, in 1 minute, I would just like to do a very, very brief recap of some of the main points of the discussions that took place in the last hours. Cognizance also of your time, of course. The priorities of the G20 Indonesia about infrastructure were very strongly highlighted, the role of the private sector, regions and cities, and gender and social inclusions, infratech 2.0, and a strong concern, as it was mentioned, regarding tangible outputs, especially regarding the implementation of the quality investment infrastructure principles were among the issues. Plus, I would say the need to team up and to combine a number of inputs to come to strong insights. We had also an impressive overview about both the spirit of continuation of the agenda of the G20 Indonesia in next year, G20 India, and about a number of initiatives in India, also connecting to issues about not just infratech, but also fintech, and ways that it can promote financial inclusion, especially in rural environments or in rapidly changing peri-urban environments, get access to MSMEs, to bigger markets. And these are issues which we find in core transformation sectors of the economy, such as creative economy, which Indonesia is very forward pushing, and circular economy and others. There were strong, I would say, as usual, inputs from the B20, and we can see the complementarity between the engagement groups here and the core agenda under your guidance within the finance track and the infrastructure working group. Then our colleague from the OECD has mentioned also a consistent agenda with new elements such as resilience and maintenance, which connects also to what was mentioned. There are a number of projects in the pipelines. They have to be done well, even before about thinking in a blue sky manner about the future in 2050. However, the issues of science, technology, innovation were also strongly mentioned, as there is more than a feeling, but an understanding that a durable exit strategy means also thinking about the future also in a different manner, hence the relevance of the issue of public goods, which is emerging. We can see that the links with operational and budgets is not yet completely there, but it is an emerging issue. It's multilateral financial institutions, a strong one, and it was very well summarized by Sebastian Winges from GIZ and by Professor Milindo. So here are a brief overview, Minister Sudato, of today's strong inputs. I leave it to you to share with us a few concluding points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Yeah, we are, I think, about to finish the seminar, which is called Post-Pandemic Infrastructure and Global Public Goods in the G20. This agenda is part of the series of discussion on priority areas to achieve targeted deliverables set out in the G20 presidency, especially in the finance track. And thank you so much for being able to join this seminar. We have had two plenaries with remarkable speakers and discussions. All of those were done to find how to leverage infrastructure investment within the G20 to recover together and for better future. As we know, infrastructure investment has been on the table of the G20 ever since the Seoul summit in 2010. The G20 infrastructure agenda is thickening with the adoption of several tools in the past years, namely G20 policy agenda on infrastructure maintenance, G20 roadmap for infrastructure as an asset class, and G20 infrastructure investor dialogue. In 2019, a breakthrough was made with the adoption of the Quality Infrastructure Investment QIF agenda, widening the perspective and taking into account spillover effects, land management, and environmental perspective. And last year, the Rome G20 leaders' declaration mentioned infrastructure investment on multiple occasions as well. As we mentioned frequently, including during today's discussion, infrastructure is an essential enabling factor to accelerate growth. It becomes a prerequisite to increase productivity and a catalyst to promote higher and inclusive growth. However, the infrastructure landscape is rapidly changing as the unprecedented effect of the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic add pressure and complexity to our ability to deliver the infrastructure again. Now, 2 years after the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, the world is in need of a new direction. It needs to build an exit strategy from the pandemic. I realize that this is not easy and needs a hard work and extra effort from all elements. There are also numerous complex and systematic risks, including political, geopolitical, macroeconomic, inequalities, and many more. However, with collaboration of all stakeholders, I do believe that we could overcome all of those complexities to provide strong and resilient infrastructure to sustainable growth and for a better future. Some of my notes from the two plenaries with remarkable speakers in this discussion today. One is the lesson from the COVID-19 pandemic to speed up the action to build up seamless and profound integration of physical and digital infrastructure. As well, the need to provide internet that to some extent becoming the public good is interestingly to be discussed within the G20 agenda. Including in this digital infrastructure is the better managed and availability of digital identity, which is very important for the basis of supporting the social assistance for the vulnerable people, SMFE, and others. We all learned a lot during the pandemic COVID when all countries trying to deliver support to the people. This digital infrastructure, including digital identity, is very, very important for financial technology. Hence, again, we need to discuss among ourselves, among the G20 agenda, to make the profound integration of physical and digital infrastructure to support the availability of internet for everybody. I think is very, very important to be discussed to within the G20 agenda to speed up the recovery and to build a better future. In this regard, finance track or even the Minister of Finance itself could trigger this dialogue. I don't want to hold everybody too long in this seminar. So to conclude my remark, once again, I would like to extend my highest appreciation to all of you who have spared your time to join this seminar. I do hope that everybody always in good health, and thank you very much. Good evening. Stay healthy. Back to you, Nicholas.
Thank you very much. This closes today's seminar on the issue of post-pandemic infrastructure and global public goods in the G20, organized with the support of the B20 Indonesia, RIS India, and Global Solutions, under the framework of the Ministry of Finance and Finance Track in the G20 Indonesia. Thank you so much. And if you have questions, we will be, of course, happy to address them afterwards through different ways you have to communicate. Thank you so much, and have a healthy end of the afternoon or day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very much for all.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Masha.
No.